Hello, everybody. It's Coach Rob. Welcome back to another Positive Performance Coaching webinar. It's been a while. I'm not going to get into the whole why we haven't had any new content out on the YouTube channel, but we are back and we have some new content coming, and here it is. Build versus buy. Some considerations and decisions to make before building a custom bike. Well, introductions. Glad you could make it. I'm really happy to be back and recording. We're going to cover this whole build versus buy, pros and cons of custom bike builds. I am Coach Rob, a cycling, running, and multi-sport coach with approximately 15 years of coaching experience and about 20 years of competitive experience, at least as a road cyclist, runner, and a multi-sport athlete. I was also did a lot of racing as a smaller child in BMX when I was much younger. Owner of Positive Performance Coaching, where we provide tailored training for all levels of athletes, both competitive and recreational athletes, from beginners to professionals, and we coach athletes from all over the world. So let's get into the specifics of kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And really what it is I've been getting a lot of questions recently that made me think about this, but this comes up pretty frequently. Is it cheaper to build a bike or to buy a bike off the rack? And the simple answer is no. It is definitely not cheaper to purchase or to build your own bike than it is to buy off the rack at a local bike shop. The long answer, though, might surprise you, is it's maybe. Sorry about the two is's there. So we've already done the introduction, and we've talked a little more about the specifics of what we're trying to accomplish in this webinar. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. This is the only other screen that you're going to see other than kind of our Contact Us page. And we're going to talk at the top two layers here is why you might want a custom bike and when it makes more sense to buy a bike off the rack at your local bike shop. And then lastly, which option provides you a competitive advantage. So when we go back to why somebody might want to purchase a custom bike, I really feel like it falls into a couple of categories. One is that we're usually talking about somebody that's been around the block for a while on a bike. It's maybe been a year or two at the very least, and maybe 5, 6, 8 years. Maybe they've been riding a bike most of their life, and they're curious, or they've decided, I know better than most manufacturers of what works well for me. Whether that means we're talking about a feature set or a performance concern, maybe it's a bike fit problem that you're trying to solve, or there are a lot of folks out there that have built custom bikes purely for the enjoyment of picking a different color or a different shape or some different feature set that's just not available. We call that bespoke building. So there's various ranges when we're talking about the customization of bike builds. I was once asked, this is a very long time ago, what's the most expensive bike I had ever seen, or how expensive can bikes get? And the original answer was sky's the limit. And this person looked at me and I said, no, there really are blank check builds out there. I was privy of seeing an order for a custom build, and it was pretty impressive. There were 2 bikes actually being built. I think the total cost was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $35,000, $40,000 between the 2 bikes. And they were matching bikes. One was a road bike, one was a time trial bike. And I won't go into the specifics of who was building them, but how is it that bikes can get that expensive? Well, for one, these weren't just off-the-rack parts. They started with an actual hand-laid-up carbon fiber frame set for both builds. There were customizations made to existing componentry for both lightness as well as a color scheme that was to be matched between both builds. And we're talking very, very, very tiny parts that had to be re-anodized, stripped, and repainted. It was incredible to see the level of detail that was going into these builds. So yeah, that person was more concerned about color and branding, and some of it had also to do with performance and fit. But a lot of folks that come to me that I coach, or just people that I know, have said, hey, would it be cheaper for me to just buy a bunch of parts and put a bike together myself? And as I said earlier, the simple answer is no. It's always going to be cheaper going to your local bike store. I'll also ask the same questions back to the individual. Are you going to build it, or are you having someone else do it? Do you have the tools and the know-how to do this? And do you have any realistic budget and schedule expectations? Have you set those? How much money are you willing to spend? Add another 10 to 20% on top of that, and you're probably pretty close. It's like building a house. It's like building software or building a business. And then the other thing too is a schedule. I tell all of my athletes that if they're about to go on a race or a big event ride, that the last thing that they want to do is to be tinkering with their bikes beforehand. So I usually put it in their calendar, if there's going to be any mechanical changes or adjustments that need to be made, especially to just mainly shifting and that kind of thing, that you've got about 7 days. If you've got a fit problem, we really optimally don't want to be doing that for about 3 to 4 weeks before that big event or that big race. However, if you race a lot or you do a lot of event riding, you probably have some lower tier or lower concerned rides. You don't think of them as training rides or training races. Then by all means, tinker away. However, when we start talking about budget, you've got to think about the hidden costs. Do you actually own all the tools necessary to put this together? Are you comfortable working with those tools? Do you think yourself as being mechanically inclined? I'm all for people experimenting and watching YouTube videos to learn how to do things. But if it's going to come at the risk of doing damage to something that's keeping you off the ground at speed, then I strongly advise you to think twice if you're not comfortable with that. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about when it makes sense to buy off the rack. Well, back to the experience level. I'm not talking about your experience level as a mechanic. I'm talking about your experience level as a cyclist. If you've only been riding a bike for 6 months to a year, well, put the brakes on this idea. Just postpone this for a little bit. Typically, when people come to me and they're wanting to build a bike, it's really they've been around the block for a while. They've learned quite a bit. They think they know better than the manufacturers out there, or they think if they put this conglomeration of parts together that they're going to have a much better riding style, or their performances are going to improve. Now, some of this actually is that case. But if you don't even know where to start with this and you just happen to read an article about really fast wheels or really fast tire wheel combinations or handlebars, you can do that on a bike that you've bought off the shelf, off the rack if you like. You can do that at a later date rather than starting from scratch. And the next is availability and accessibility. So what I mean by that is how available are the spares that you're looking for. If you build a bike at home and then you need to have something done to it because of that one of these other scenarios that I talked about, like you've got to get something repaired on a bike before a race. Let's say that it's some components you bought from a very small boutique manufacturer. If that bike shop doesn't have access to those components, they may not be able to get your bike fixed in a timely manner. So think about that. The accessibility of those parts, maybe they can't get to them. Maybe the ship dates would take so long for them that those costs were just going to go up and up and up. That gets to the next thing, fixed cost and immediate gratification. Well, we Americans love immediate gratification. And if you go into a local bike shop and you look at the rack and you find that bike that just reaches out to you, it's like, oh, that makes me want to ride fast. That makes me want to ride longer, more, do more. Then that's probably the right bike for you, as long as it fits you. Any bike shop worth their weight in gold should be able to provide you what is known as a shop fit. And in a shop fit, you're going to get probably about 80% of the way there to a really good fit. Maybe not all the marginal gains that you could get from a professional fit, but you're going to be very, very, very close. And the rest of it, you're going to know within about 5 minutes after riding that brand new bike out in the parking lot if this fit is going to work for you or not, whether the saddle's too high, too low, that sort of thing. But when you have that experience behind the shop and they can look at you and immediately say, whoa, yeah, I know you like the color scheme of that, but we don't have that in your size, then you're dealing with a voice of reason and experience that you may not yet possess to go off and build something custom. Lastly, which of these options provides you a competitive advantage? Now, when we're looking at that question, competitive advantage, how are you defining competitive advantage? Is it a cost savings? Is it a performance increase? I think that's really where we split this idea of competitive advantage in this discussion, is that if your budget, whether it's financial and or time based, then going to the local bike shop is probably going to be your fastest means. If it is you're looking to have the fastest possible build based on your physiology and level of experience and desired outcomes, then yeah, that bike that you build custom at home might very well provide you a competitive advantage over your fellow competitors. Now, I use that word competitor quite a bit, or competitive, and just because we're talking about this, I'm not necessarily talking about, someone who's racing, whether it's amateur or professional. I'm talking about the club ride. How many, show of hands, of you have been out to a club ride and wished you could get to the top of the hill faster? Guess what? Those people behind you or in front of you are your competitors. And just because it's not a sanctioned race doesn't mean that you're not racing towards some new goal. All right. So if you have any kind of questions about this topic, or you're considering a build versus buy scenario and you're one of the athletes that I coach, I want to hear from you. However, if you're not one of the athletes that I coach and you're interested in this subject and other ones here on YouTube or out at posperformancecoaching.com, where I've written and I've had many more podcasts and blogs on all kinds of topics for all kinds of levels of athletes. If you're curious, you can leave a comment here at YouTube, or you can actually reach out to me. And here's my email address. It's rob@posperformancecoaching.com. Or you can go out to the Pos Performance Coaching website and leave us a message at our contact area. Or you can reach me, DM me if you'd like, at rgrissom on Twitter. I'm not on there very much, but I do check. And then lastly, if you're really in a hurry, call me. 502-608-4585. That is a U.S. phone number, so charges may apply. If you would much rather set up a Skype call, we can also do that. That's Coach Rob PPC on Skype. All right, everybody, I hope you have a great training week, and I look forward to hearing your questions.